Hello and welcome to our five-step method discussion on using counselling and other skills as part of the five-step method. I am Richard Velleman, one of the originators of the five-step method, and I'd like to introduce our international panel today. We have Steve Staunton, who lives and works in New Zealand. Steve is accredited in all of the five-step method areas. He's a five-step method practitioner, assessor, trainer, and he's also an assessor of other five-step method trainers. Ed Seipler lives and works in Northern Ireland. Ed is a health development specialist in alcohol and drugs with the South Eastern Health and Social Care Trust in Northern Ireland. And he is a five-step method practitioner, as well as one of the originators of Steps to Cope, the intervention developed from the five-step method to help young people affected by their parents' problems. John Hill lives and works in Bath in England. He runs a local charity providing counselling to people with substance or gambling problems and their affected family members. And he is a five-step method practitioner and assessor. And Jill Velleman lives and works in England, and she is the lead five-step method assessor. We're going to start by finding out what the panel sees that is evidence of good use of core counselling skills in the five-step method. And what does that mean for both the practitioner and the affected family member? So I'd like to start with Steve. What do you think is good practice in the use of core counselling competences?
Well, thank you, Richard. I suppose I was going to focus mainly on sort of creating this relationship of trust and warmth. And I suppose the key thing is demonstrating genuineness. And I think evidence of good practice in that is it starts with firstly welcoming the client and thanking them for being a part of or being a part of the five-step method and choosing to use that. But it's also about I suppose us asking permission to talk about the things that we want to talk about, using their name, and if perhaps there's a name that comes from a different cultural background, making sure that we're getting it right. So it's just these respectful things that we would like to hear if someone was talking to us. The use of humour can be evidence of good practice in terms of creating a relationship of warmth, and certainly in terms of allowing the family member to trust us. It's about being non-judgmental in our reactions and responses. So not just in what we say, but being really mindful of our body language, which obviously we don't get to see usually in an audio recording of someone's competency, but something for practitioners to be aware of is, oh yeah, how am I reacting if a family member says this or says something that? So it's, I suppose in terms of empathy, it's also about being able to name an emotion and be able to kind of reflect back on, wow, geez, that must be, and to attempt to put ourselves in the shoes of the family member, and demonstrating empathy in that way. So I think for me, that's about how we can show we're showing the right conditions, or creating the right conditions for the family member to talk to us.
Thanks, Steve. That's really, really helpful. I'll remember to unmute next time as well. So can I move to Ed and ask you what you think are some of the main bits of good practice in the use of core counselling skills?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think one of the key things is active listening and summarizing. Those evidence-based interventions or skills, they're not unique to five-step. They're fundamental to any therapeutic relationship. And think about getting into a rowboat. You want your rowboat to go somewhere, you're using your oars, open questions, affirmations, reflective listening, summarizing. Now, these skills, they're easy to learn. They're harder to master in practice. And particularly reflective listening, active, empathic listening. You're listening beyond just the words. You're watching body language. You're putting back, not just putting back like a parrot what you hear, but you're looking at thinking, feeling, meaning. You're diving a bit deeper. You're really showing that family member that you're working to understand what they're experiencing. That effort to understand is basically showing you care. And that will open up the family member to talk more, talk deeper. And another skill within those oars, something that it's one of the most powerful tools in our toolkit, are affirmations. Not a compliment, but pointing out a strength of the family member. Family members feel bad enough about themselves. They beat themselves up unmercifully. So when we see a strength, point it out. They may deflect it, but they're hearing it. And there's good evidence that when people hear those affirmations, they do start feeling a bit better about themselves. But it also strengthens that therapeutic alliance, which is exactly, Steve, as you talked about, fundamental to any of our work.
Thank you, Ed. Again, really helpful. I shall summarize some of those things at the end, but let me move now to John and ask you what you think makes good practice in the use of these core counselling skills.
Excuse me. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think it's always good to see and hear when a practitioner evaluates their own work, whether you're new to 5-step or whether you're an experienced practitioner. And I remember reading somewhere that it's hard to practice archery in the dark. And I really like that statement. So if you're working one-to-one, you don't always get the feedback that would help you improve. And so by recording ourselves from time to time, even if we are experienced or new at 5 steps, then we can then assess our work to see what sort of quality it is. Because this is about helping the FM to empower them and to encourage them where they're at. And Ed has mentioned MI, and in MI terms, the 4 principles of engagement, focusing, evoking, and planning is to just to assess, is our work helping the FM move on? So by reviewing it, we can see, have we reached those 4 points? And this may well help the FM feel less stuck, that things are actually moving. So by continuing to assess our work from time to time, it helps us improve and helps ensure that the FM sessions are both valuable and a good level of support.
Thank you, John. Again, really helpful points there. Let me move on to Jill and ask what you think shows good practice in the use of these core counselling skills.
Well, when I'm assessing other practitioners, it's hearing the practitioner having this really lovely balance of allowing the affected family member to talk about what they need to, but also keeping to the aim of the session. And I think it's emphasising that 5-step is a semi-structured process. And it's all about the practitioner being in charge of that process, but the family member is in charge of the content. And as John said, one of those things is listening to your tape and really thinking, did I allow the family member to talk? But did I also keep to the aims of 5-step? So I think that's my overall message for the counselling skills.
Thank you very much, Jill. So, let me just quickly summarize that. People have obviously raised a lot of really important and central points about the nature of counselling. The development of the therapeutic relationship is absolutely vital. And Steve has given a number of pointers as to how that can be done in terms of welcoming, showing appreciation, a whole range of things like that, developing empathy and so on. Ed has talked more about that, has talked particularly about how in that therapeutic relationship we show that we care. And we show that we care by the quality of our listening, by the affirmations that we give, and so on and so forth. John has talked about how important it is that we as practitioners listen to ourselves and work out what we're doing, which is helpful and not helpful. And it is amazing. It's a very rare thing for practitioners to listen to themselves. And it's an incredibly powerful and incredibly helpful tool that someone, whether they're going in for accreditation or anything else, but they actually record their sessions occasionally and listen to themselves. It's a great eye-opener for everybody. And so this idea of continuing to assess our work and continuing to work out whether or not we're in motivational interviewing terms, able to engage, to focus, to evoke things in people and to help them think about planning. All of those are really important. And Jill has talked about emphasizing that the 5-step method, and therefore our use of core counselling skills within that, underlines the fact that the 5-step method is a semi-structured intervention. And that means that getting the balance between the structure on the one hand and allowing and encouraging and enabling the family member to talk on the other hand is absolutely central. And all of us have heard when we've assessed practitioners, people who get that balance slightly wrong in one way or another. So either they are great at getting people to talk, but they don't put enough structure on it, and so they don't have time to do the session properly, or they're a bit overstructured, but what they don't do is allow the family member to talk. That balance is absolutely central. Okay, that's very, very helpful indeed for all of you. I'd like to move on to looking at our second question here, which is, what common problems do you see with a practitioner's use of these core counselling skills, and how can they be overcome? So again, I'd like to start off with Steve this time, about really how you make a relationship of trust, of warmth, of genuineness, of empathy, so that it creates the right conditions for a family member to talk.
So, yeah, thank you, Richard. I suppose focusing on the common problems with the beginning of a session is often what we see is that people rush the start of the session and attempt to jump right in without reconnecting with the family member sitting, or the person sitting in front of them. And so, you know, it's easy enough, as I mentioned before, to do that by thanking them and welcoming them. And just creating a space of reconnection before you set the agenda for the day. And I think there is a fine line between checking in on how a person's doing and reconnecting with them. Because sometimes if we ask, how are you doing, it might be 5-10 minutes later before you actually say, hang on a minute, this is step 2 that we're doing now, and here's the agenda, and this is what we're going to do. So connecting with the person, welcoming them, when that's not done, the session can feel rushed. And obviously that relationship of trust and warmth is not necessarily there, or not as obvious. And judgmental. Us being judgmental is often something that is a common problem here, where we may say or react in a way that doesn't demonstrate empathy. So one way around that is to use a phrase such as, it must be very difficult to live with that worry every time he goes out in the evening. So that's a way that sort of recognises the emotion and puts you as the counsellor in a place, or as the 5-step method practitioner, in a place that's demonstrating that you understand, or you have some empathy, and you're genuine in your concern as well. So yeah, slowing things down is really important, I think, to get that relationship going again with the future steps that we do.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Steve. Ed, I'd like you to think about some of the common problems that come up with our second core counselling criteria, which is about careful listening and summarising and minimal encouragers and those sorts of things. What common problems come up, do you think, and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, I think one of the common problems I see so often is when people are hearing family members' dilemmas, raw emotions that come with living with these challenging issues. We get into fixing mode. I dive in with solutions, I dive in with suggestions, and that writing reflex is not listening. And it's so important for practitioners to have a quiet mind, to be able to listen to family members, normalize things because these are such common experiences, but don't try to fix things. Understand it. And a really important thing for any of us to use in 5-step is to trust your intervention. Jill, you said it's a process. That one, for one step you're on, whether it be the first one or the last one, trust the whole intervention. And when you're doing that, you're adding to another piece of the puzzle. The other common problem I see people doing quite a lot is not summarizing enough. Really good way to start a session, what we talked about last time, a crucial way to end the session. But be careful what you're summarizing, because as you're gathering up, you want to make sure that you're picking what's going to contribute to that family member hearing themselves, appreciating their strengths. So you're choosing what to summarize, but at the same time, by summarizing well, you're showing that family member you're carefully and actively listening. Powerful process.
Thank you very much, Ed. That's very helpful. I really liked the point you just made then about how when we summarize, we're not being a tape recorder. We're not simply summarizing everything that the person has said. We're selectively summarizing, and that's really, really important, that we, again, in charge of the process, we know what we're trying to do. And therefore we use our summary to enable us to do the sorts of things that we want to do, which is to empower and to help this family member and to make them feel heard. So we're selectively summarizing. So it doesn't reduce the importance of our listening and our summarizing, but it shows again how important it is that as a practitioner, we know what we're doing and we're trying to be in charge of that process. Thank you very much, Ed. John, the third of our criteria is often a difficult one for people. It's about allowing silences and allowing the expression of emotion. What sort of common problems do you see in that? And how do you think we can overcome them?
Yes, I think very often that when listening to recordings and meeting FMs, that they feel that they shouldn't have certain emotions. And I have heard statements quite often, I know I shouldn't feel X, or anger or disappointment or whatever it is. And I think Ed mentioned earlier that a lot of people find it very easy to feel shame for what their loved ones are doing or what they're involved in. But when it comes to themselves feeling anger, feeling disappointment, they seem to think they shouldn't feel those sometimes. So it's about taking time to acknowledge and to the FM's emotions and to reassure them that they're not alone in this, and to normalize those emotions. It's perfectly acceptable to be angry, to be disappointed. So take time to hear those emotions, and then not really being in a rush to fill a gap for the practitioner to sit comfortably with uncomfortable moments in silence. This produces a real calmness sometimes, so they're not rushing off to try and, somebody said before, that the writing reflex, trying to sort things out, feeling uncomfortable if somebody expresses anger very openly, because this can be very cathartic and emotionally liberating for the FM. So really it's about staying in the moment at times, not rushing ahead, and acknowledging those emotions.
Thank you, John. Very helpful as always. Let me turn to Jill then. Another of our important criteria in counselling, the core counselling skills that we use in the 5-step method, is about offering positive encouragement and reassurance and hope and support. What do you think some of the common problems in this area are, Jill, and how can we overcome them?
I think from listening to many practitioners and family members, when family members are in sessions, I mean, they are feeling a bit hopeless. Life is actually tricky. They are worried, they are concerned. And I think for the practitioner, it is about this positive encouragement and reminding people of their strengths. So when they talk about any of their strengths, it is to affirm these. And it can be very cathartic for the family member to be reminded of some of their strengths. But the second thing I think very important is to give some hope to the situation. Hope can be done by normalizing the situation so that they know other family members go through this. But also, I heard one practitioner say that, well, although your son's not changing, you are making some positive changes in how you're coping. The family member had thought about some alternatives in the way they were coping, and actually through doing the network diagram for their support, they'd made some really positive changes. And it's important to go back to giving the family member hope about the changes they're doing, which may mean the person with the problem isn't changing at the moment, but they are. And this is all about helping the family member reduce their stress, reduce their strain, give them more support. So in that counselling process, it is to, as the others have said, listen, allow silences, acknowledge the emotions, but ensure that you give the family member hope and optimism.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you all of you for your comments about these first 4 of our 5 core counselling competencies. The 5th one is not quite the same as the other 4. The other 4 are all about the things that we've been talking about, developing a therapeutic relationship and allowing silences and emotion and affirmation and so on and so forth. The 5th one is about clarifying risk and safety issues and managing those if they come up. And I think, want to make 2 points, which are very common problems, and I think how to overcome them. So the first common problem is that actually people don't ask about risk. They may ask about risk in the very first session or before the first session, but they don't ask about risk afterwards. And the solution to that is very simple. We always must ask about risk. Risk can change. And so the fact that you might have done a good risk assessment before session 1 doesn't mean when you see somebody a month or more later for session 3 or 4 or 5, that things haven't changed. So you've always got to ask about risk. That's the first thing. The second thing is what we mean by risk. And over the years, I think we've widened our view of what risk is. We used to think about risk as being the very obvious things, domestic violence and abuse or child protection issues. But actually, although those things are obviously still included in what we mean by risk, risk can include all sorts of risks to the family member, risks to their mental health, risks to their physical health, risks to their emotional well-being, but also risk to other people in the family or risk to the relative with a drug or alcohol or gambling problem. So our sessions very much are about looking forward and helping people to change, but they're also about ensuring that the family member and other members of the family are safe and are feeling safe. So that's a really important core counselling skill. Okay, I'd like to thank all of the panel for your great participation today, and thank you very much indeed.
So just to recap on some of the key points from our panel discussion on counselling. We're trying to create the right conditions and develop the therapeutic relationship. The most important thing is that we don't rush. The key is welcoming and thanking the person at the start and showing appreciation at the end for the sharing that the family member has done with us. Getting a person's name right and then using it is incredibly helpful, and for that matter, the names of other important people in the family that they're talking about. Obviously, it's important that we are respectful, that we're aware of our body language. Active listening is terribly important. Selectively summarizing, reflecting, diving in deeper. It's easy to read about what reflective listening and active listening is like, but it can be difficult to do. What we're trying to do is working to understand what the family member is experiencing. We're showing that we care, and the quality of our active listening shows that we are caring and really trying to help. It's important that we have an overall view of affirmation. We're trying to point out people's strengths and affirm them. A very important and useful tip is to record ourselves and listen back to it for the purposes of improving and evaluating our practice. Obviously, we use recording for accreditation purposes as well. But the key thing here is that it's not only about accreditation, it's how we can best improve our practice. Our evaluation of listening to our recording can help us to assess how valuable a session may have been to a family member. In motivational interviewing terms, each session should include 4 key points: engagement, focus, evoking, and planning. This will assist the family member to feel less stuck, and that each session has the purpose and outcome to support and empower the family member to reduce the stresses and strains that they're facing. It's really important that we don't try and fix things. Some family members seem to think that they shouldn't feel certain emotions. I've often heard statements such as, "I know I shouldn't feel X, but." It often sounds as if many family members accept the feelings of shame, but not always many of the other emotions that they may have. So we need to take time to reassure the family member that any emotion that they feel is very likely to be valid and help them normalize these feelings. We mustn't be in a rush to fill a gap. We've got to sit comfortably with silences. We've got to stay calm and not rush in to speak, because not rushing to speak can be very cathartic, emotionally liberating for the family member. It gives them some time to think about things. They need to know that we feel comfortable with giving them time and silences. We need to offer positive encouragement and affirm their strengths. We give hope by normalizing and summarizing the changes the family member has made. We need, of course, to prepare well, and we need to keep checklists and other information handy in the consultation. We mustn't be shy about stating that we're just going to refer to them briefly. It's very important that we try and get this. This is a semi-structured intervention, and we need to make sure we have the structure right. And remember, we are in charge of the process. We've got to let the family member talk. We've got to get the balance right. As I say, it's a semi-structured intervention. If you listen to these tips, and if they're useful to you, it will really help you all the way through the 5-step method. As always, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of this video who are listed here.